In January 1959, a group of 9 experienced hikers set out on an expedition in the northern Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union. Their goal was ambitious but not extraordinary by the standards of the time. A winter trek across remote terrain to reach Mount Otorten, a peak whose name in the local Mansi language roughly translates to "do not go there." The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk. Dyatlov was known among his peers as competent, methodical, and cautious. He had led previous expeditions and was respected for his organizational skills. Every member of the group was either a student or a recent graduate, most studying engineering or technical disciplines. All had prior experience in winter hiking and skiing. Several had completed expeditions in similarly harsh conditions. The group was officially certified at Grade 3, the highest difficulty rating for Soviet hiking expeditions at the time. This was not a reckless group. It was a trained one. The original team consisted of 10 members. Shortly after the journey began, one member, Yuri Yudin, began experiencing severe joint pain and health complications. On February 2nd, he turned back. This decision likely saved his life. The remaining 9 continued forward. They were Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kalmogorova, Ludmila Dubinina, Yuri Doroshenko, Yuri Krivonischenko, Alexander Kolevatov, Rustam Slobodin, Nikolai Thibeaux-Brignol, and Semyon Zolotaryov. The expedition began on January 23, 1959. The group traveled by train and truck before reaching the last inhabited settlement, Vizhay, on January 27th. From there, they proceeded on skis into increasingly remote terrain. They kept diaries. They took photographs. They logged progress meticulously. These records would later become crucial. Early entries describe high spirits. The group joked, sang, and documented their surroundings with humor. They were aware of the difficulty ahead but showed no signs of fear or distress. On January 31st, they reached the edge of forested terrain and began ascending toward the mountain pass that would later bear Dyatlov's name. Weather conditions deteriorated. Strong winds, heavy snowfall, and poor visibility slowed progress. According to diary entries, the group struggled to maintain direction. At some point on February 1st, they appear to have veered off their planned route toward Mount Otorten. Rather than descending back into the forest to seek shelter, they chose to establish camp on the slope of Kolotsyakal, another mountain whose name translates to Mountain of the Dead. This decision has been debated for decades, but it must be viewed in context. Descending into the forest would have required backtracking in worsening weather. Camping on the slope while exposed allowed the group to maintain elevation and direction. For experienced hikers, this was a defensible choice. They pitched their tent on an incline, cutting into the snow to create a flatter surface. This is confirmed by photographs recovered later. The final known photograph taken by the group shows the tent partially buried in snow, its entrance facing downslope. There is no indication of panic, no indication of conflict, no indication of anything unusual. That night, temperatures are estimated to have dropped below -25 degrees Celsius, -13 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chill making conditions even harsher. Sometime during the night of February 1st to February 2nd, something happened. What exactly occurred inside that tent remains unknown. But what is known comes from physical evidence recovered weeks later. The group never returned. When they failed to check in by February 12th as planned, concern grew. Initially, delays were attributed to weather, but by February 20th, search parties were dispatched. On February 26th, a search team located the campsite. The tent was found partially collapsed and buried under snow, and it had been cut open from the inside. This single detail would become one of the most important facts of the entire case. The tent was not ripped. It was not torn by animals. It was cut with deliberate slashes. Personal belongings were still inside. Boots, coats, food, equipment. Everything needed to survive the night in those conditions had been left behind. Footprints were found leading away from the tent. They were barefoot or in socks. They led downslope toward the forest. There were no signs of a struggle at the campsite, no signs of fighting, No signs of other people, just the tent, abandoned, and 9 sets of footprints disappearing into the wilderness. The discovery of the tent marked the beginning of a methodical search operation conducted by volunteers, students, local authorities, and later the Soviet military. Search teams followed the footprints leading downslope from the campsite. The tracks were visible despite snowfall, suggesting they were made shortly before fresh snow accumulated. Investigators noted something unusual. The tracks were not chaotic. They did not show signs of running. They suggested controlled movement, as if the hikers were walking, or at least attempting to move deliberately despite the extreme cold. This detail would later become significant. At the edge of the forest, searchers made the first grim discovery. Beneath a large cedar tree, the bodies of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko were found. They were lying near the remains of a small fire, with charred branches above them, indicating that they had attempted to build warmth. Both men were barefoot. They were wearing minimal clothing, underwear and torn garments, completely insufficient for sub-zero conditions. Their hands showed signs of frostbite and superficial burns, consistent with prolonged exposure to fire while hypothermic. One of the men had bite marks on his knuckles, which investigators later interpreted as a possible response to pain or cold-induced delirium. Above them, branches of the cedar tree were broken up to several meters high, suggesting that one or both had climbed the tree, possibly to look back toward the campsite or to escape something on the ground. From the cedar tree, searchers followed a line back toward the tent. Along this line, they discovered the bodies of Zinaida Kolmogorova, Rustam Slobodin, and Igor Dyatlov himself. These 3 were found at varying distances between the forest and the tent, suggesting they had attempted to return. Their positions implied collapse during movement. Zinaida Kolmogorova was found face down in the snow. She was wearing several layers of clothing but no shoes. Her hands were clenched, and her face showed signs of frostbite. Rustam Slobodin was found slightly uphill from her. He was wearing 1 boot and several layers of clothing. A later autopsy would reveal a small fracture in his skull, but investigators concluded it was not immediately fatal. Igor Dyatlov was found closest to the tent. He was dressed more adequately than some others but still lacked proper footwear. His body position suggested exhaustion rather than trauma. At this stage, 6 weeks after the incident, 5 of the 9 hikers had been located. The remaining 4 were not found until May, when snowmelt revealed a ravine deeper within the forest. Their discovery introduced new complexities. The bodies of Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolevatov, and Nikolai Thibeaux-Brignol were found buried under several meters of snow, lying in a streambed. Unlike the first 5, these 4 were more fully clothed. Some were wearing garments that belonged to other group members, suggesting that clothing had been redistributed after death. This indicated a degree of survival behavior. However, the injuries found on these 4 hikers were significantly more severe. Nikolai Thibeaux-Brignol had suffered a massive skull fracture. Lyudmila Dubinina had multiple rib fractures and was missing her tongue, as well as parts of her lips and eyes. Semyon Zolotaryov also had broken ribs, comparable in severity to injuries seen in high-impact accidents. Alexander Kolevatov had less visible trauma but showed signs of hypothermia. What made these injuries especially troubling was the absence of corresponding external wounds. There were no major cuts, no defensive injuries, no signs of a physical fight. The fractures were internal and forceful, yet the skin was largely intact. The forensic pathologist who examined the bodies described the injuries as comparable to those sustained in a car crash. However, no evidence of such an impact was present at the site. The autopsies concluded that 6 of the hikers died from hypothermia. The remaining 3, Dubinina, Zolotaryov, and Thibeaux-Brignol, died from traumatic injuries. The official cause of death listed for the group was a compelling natural force. This phrase was highly unusual even by Soviet standards. Further complicating matters were reports of radiation. Some clothing items tested during the investigation showed elevated levels of radioactivity. Not all garments were affected. The contamination was localized. At the time, no clear explanation was offered. It is important to clarify what was and was not found. There were no signs of assault by other humans, animal attack, gunshot wounds, knife wounds, or evidence of robbery. The hikers' money and valuables were intact. The tent showed no evidence of an external attack. No footprints other than those of the hikers were documented at the campsite. Investigators also noted an unusual discoloration of the skin on some bodies, described by witnesses as orange or brownish. Later explanations suggested this may have been a result of decomposition and environmental exposure. Eyewitnesses involved in the recovery reported that the bodies appeared calm, not contorted in fear. This detail, while subjective, was recorded. The Soviet investigation proceeded under pressure. By the late 1950s, unexplained deaths in remote regions raised concerns about public perception, especially among students and families. The case attracted attention within academic circles, as many of the hikers were well known within the Ural Polytechnic Institute. The investigation files show that some lines of inquiry were opened and then abruptly closed. Witness statements from local Mansi people were collected. No evidence was found implicating them, and they were cleared early in the investigation. Military involvement in the region was acknowledged but not detailed. Certain documents were classified. Photographs were restricted. By May 1959, the case was officially closed. Families were told that the hikers had died due to an overwhelming natural force that they could not overcome. No criminal charges were filed. No further explanation was provided. For decades, the case remained largely inaccessible to the public. Files were archived. Discussion was discouraged. It would not resurface in detail until years later, when documents were declassified and survivors began asking questions. What investigators could say with certainty was limited. The hikers left the tent voluntarily or were compelled to leave it, cutting their way out from the inside. They walked into extreme cold without adequate clothing. Some attempted to return. Some sought shelter and fire. Some survived longer than others. But the event that caused them to abandon the tent, the event that set everything in motion, was never definitively identified. That unanswered question is what continues to define the Dyatlov Pass Incident. After the Dyatlov Pass investigation was officially closed in 1959, the case did not truly end. It entered a long period of silence. For decades, access to the files was restricted, discussion was limited, and families were left with a conclusion that explained little. When the case began to resurface in the late Soviet period and after the collapse of the USSR, researchers approached it with the same evidence but very different expectations. What followed was not the discovery of new facts, but repeated attempts to reconcile existing ones. The first and most enduring explanation was a natural disaster, specifically an avalanche. Avalanche theory argues that the hikers cut their way out of the tent to escape an imminent collapse of snow. In this scenario, they fled downslope to avoid being buried, intending to return once the danger passed. This explanation accounts for several facts: the tent being cut open from the inside, the group leaving without boots or heavy clothing, and the orderly footprints leading away from the campsite. However, avalanche theory also encounters difficulties. The slope angle where the tent was pitched was relatively shallow by avalanche standards. No clear evidence of a large avalanche was documented by the initial search teams. The tent itself was found partially standing, not crushed. Later studies proposed a slab avalanche, a more localized snow failure that could strike suddenly and leave limited surface evidence. This could explain internal injuries without widespread destruction. In 2020, Russian authorities reopened the case and officially endorsed a version of the slab avalanche theory, concluding that the hikers died as a result of natural forces. This conclusion was based on modern modeling rather than new physical evidence. Critics point out that while a slab avalanche may explain some injuries, it does not clearly explain why some hikers traveled nearly a mile into the forest, why clothing was redistributed later, or why some injuries resembled high-impact trauma without external wounds. Another explanation involves katabatic winds, powerful, downward-flowing gusts capable of producing extreme noise, pressure, and disorientation. Such winds could have made the tent uninhabitable and caused panic or confusion. This theory explains the decision to leave the tent, but it does not fully explain the severe injuries found in the ravine. A more controversial line of inquiry involves infrasound, a low-frequency sound phenomenon generated by wind interacting with mountain formations. Infrasound has been linked in some studies to anxiety, panic, and physiological distress. Supporters argue that infrasound could have triggered irrational behavior without visible external threat. However, there is no direct evidence that infrasound was present that night, and the theory remains speculative. Military activity has also been examined. The Northern Urals were used for weapons testing and training during the late 1950s. Some witnesses reported seeing glowing objects in the sky around the time of the incident. Certain documents related to the case were classified. Radiation findings on some clothing items added to suspicion. Yet no direct evidence has been produced linking the hikers' deaths to weapons testing. No blast craters, shrapnel, or burns consistent with explosions were documented. Official records deny any military involvement. This explanation remains unproven. The involvement of local Mansi people was considered early in the investigation and dismissed. No evidence supported this theory, and it is now widely regarded as unfounded. Animal attack was also ruled out based on lack of injuries consistent with such an event. What remains consistent across all explanations is uncertainty. Every proposed cause explains some elements and fails to explain others. This is the core reason the Dyatlov Pass incident continues to resist closure. Modern forensic analysis has helped clarify some aspects. The missing soft tissue on Lyudmila Dubinina's face is now widely attributed to natural decomposition and scavenging in a wet environment. Skin discoloration is likely the result of post-mortem changes. These explanations reduce some of the more sensational claims, but they do not address the central mystery. Why did 9 experienced hikers abandon shelter in lethal conditions? Why did they split up? Why did some suffer injuries inconsistent with surface trauma? Why was the official conclusion so vague? The phrase, "a compelling natural force," remains one of the most unusual official findings in Soviet investigative history. It suggests that investigators encountered something they could not, or would not, define precisely. In recent years, renewed interest in the case has led to more careful analysis and fewer extreme claims. Many researchers now accept that the tragedy was likely the result of multiple overlapping factors rather than a single cause. Environmental stress, weather, terrain, human decision-making under pressure. In this view, the Dyatlov Pass incident was not a mystery event, but a catastrophic cascade, one mistake followed by another under conditions where recovery was impossible. Yet even this explanation leaves gaps, and those gaps matter. Not because they demand paranormal answers, but because they remind us of the limits of reconstruction. Some events occur without witnesses. Some decisions are made under circumstances that cannot be recreated. The Dyatlov Pass incident exists in that space. It is not a story of monsters or conspiracies. It is a story of experienced people facing an environment that offered no margin for error. The mystery persists not because the evidence is fantastical, but because it is incomplete. And perhaps that is why the case endures, because it forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that sometimes, even with records, photographs, autopsies, and investigations, the full truth remains just out of reach.